Gideon's son and what happens after Gideon died, and none of it is good. So we've got a lot to cover here. It's a fairly long chapter, so we're not going to be able to read every verse. It's a long chapter. So we'll do a lot of skipping. I hope that is okay. One of the reasons I like to go so slow on Wednesday nights is we actually get to read every verse and let it speak for itself. But this is not a story I want to take slowly. I think it's meant to be taken as a whole. So let's start here in verse 1. We'll read the first two verses. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them, and to the whole clan of his mother's family, say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. Now, so far in Judges, we have, at least when the story of Judges started, we've had the same pattern. So it's disobedience, discipline, deliverance. Abimelech breaks that cycle. And really, what you have here is the period of discipline, or a period of disobedience followed by discipline. And so what you don't have at the end of the story is deliverance. It is all discipline. Everybody in the story, just nothing good happens to them. It's not a good story. It's not a happy. So you're not going to get a happy ending. You know, they all lived peacefully in the land for 40 years. There's none of that. Abimelech is a bad dude. And what we see with him is that unlike the other judges, Abimelech is a usurper. So in one sense, he's not a judge. I don't think the text calls him that. He's actually, I said this to someone today, he is the first king of Israel. Now, we would say Saul is, and rightly so, because Saul is the first king of united Israel. But the first person we have in Scripture that I'm aware of that takes the title of king is Abimelech. And you remember, Gideon didn't take that title. He took all the trappings, but he didn't take the title. Abimelech has no self-control, but he takes it for himself. So the coronation of Abimelech, verses 1 to 6, Gideon's dead. And the thing about nations is they don't like vacuums of leadership. And the story of Judges is one story after another of a vacuum. So that's why you have the judges. The judges come to sort of set things straight at the civil level, but they are a theocracy, so God is their king. The judges just sort of keep some peace. And when they get out of whack, they get rid of the bad guys, and they just keep the peace. So every time a judge dies, you get this vacuum. And we've seen that. Well, here, Abimelech is going to try to stop that sort of a vacuum. So remember that Abimelech is not just the son of Gideon. He is the son of Gideon and one of his concubines. So in the ancient Near Eastern world, he really has no right to a throne. And Gideon had a throne, basically. So he has to basically usurp the throne from someone who would be entitled to it. So you get his unnamed concubine in verse 1. So we've talked about that. Reminder there at the end of chapter 8, he was the son of a concubine. And his first act of securing support is not to go to his father's hometown. And the reason is because he has over 70 brothers. And they're all going to say, no, we don't want to have anything to do with you. We've got better options. So he goes to his mother's side of the family. And he says, well, you decide what you want. Do you want 70 rulers, 77 rulers, or do you want one? And would you want the one ruler to come from your hometown? That makes sense. Makes sense. We still do this today. Have you noticed that most presidents win their state? Not all. Al Gore lost Tennessee, and really it cost him the election. I know you're going to say Florida, but if you won Tennessee, if my math is right, Florida wouldn't have really mattered. But he's a Tennessee boy who didn't win it. Clinton won Arkansas. I mean, you can't imagine that happening now, but he won Arkansas. Of course, W won Texas, and so on and so forth. So we kind of have that even now, but certainly back then you would have that. So he has drawn a distinction between, do you want monarchy or do you want oligarchy? Do you want my brothers to run things for all of us, or do you want me to run things and I'm from your town? My mama grew up right here. My grandparents are over in that neighborhood. Which one do you want? And in verses 3 to 4, the leaders of Shechem agree with him. And I want you to notice this, verse 3. His mother's relatives spoke all these words in his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem. That language is interesting. Their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he's our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who fought. There's so much there in verse 4, right? So you have that his campaign is going to be funded by religious funds taken from idols. So much as you would bring your resources to a local church, right, tithes and whatnot. So you would do things like that in the ancient world, and they're going to take that coffer, and that is going to be his financial base to usurp the throne. So this guy is way out of whack. Now remember what his dad did. His dad destroyed such an altar and then rebuilt it after Israel was liberated from the Midianites. So what do you expect his son to do? So he takes the resource, and now notice this. He hired worthless and reckless fellows. That word worthless is interesting. It literally means empty. So let me give you two examples of this. Genesis 37, they took him and cast him into a pit. This is Joseph. And the pit was empty, right there. Right? There's no water in it. So it's a cistern. Your translation say cistern. We talked about it when we looked at Genesis 37. It's empty. There's nothing in it. It's what the word means. I'll give you another example. Judges 7, which we've looked at. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies. Gideon, of course. He put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers. And remember that he's going to light things on fire and blow a trumpet. So the word means empty. But when you're applying it to an individual, then it doesn't mean that there is no literal brain. But that's what you mean, right? So we would use words like worthless or vain. We may even use words like clueless, fools. The Greek word for fool is where we get our word moron. It's the only context I'm allowed to say moron in a church. It's so we would use words like that. And so we get this all over the Bible. Judges 11, then Jephthah, who we'll see soon enough, fled from his brethren and dwelt in the land of Tob. There were gathered empty men to Jephthah. There it is. Vain men, worthless men. 2 Samuel 6, David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. You're bringing shame upon us. You are acting as one of the empty fellows shamelessly uncovering himself. Right? Empty, vain, worthless. 2 Chronicles 13 says, there was gathered unto him empty men, children of Belial. So, of course, this is the story of Rehoboam. What happens to Rehoboam? He listens to the young at the cost of the wise. These men are empty. Right? And this is what he does. Now, I want you to notice here, naturally, how power attracts worthless people. Now, we all know it's true. You're just not supposed to say that. It attracts good people, and we can name them. George Washington, okay, he's a pretty good guy. Surrounded, his cabinet is the best America will ever have. Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, so on and so forth. Like, those guys aren't empty. Give it enough time and allow there to be enough power, and you're going to find people who understand that if I can get a foot in that atmosphere, I'll be set up for life. Power attracts worthless people. Where there's power, there's money, there's influence, there's everything else. And here you have a guy who's getting power, and he attracts to himself vain people. Maybe they're yes men, I don't know. But and what you're going to see is the unfolding of fools giving worthless advice and the downfall of that administration. David and Solomon will go through the same thing. Rehoboam will as well. So now, notice verse 5. We got to move on. He went to his father's house at Ophrah, killed his brothers, the son of Jerubbaal, 70 men, on one stone. Now, the text doesn't say this, but is this the advice he's getting from his worthless fellows? So you have your campaign staff, right? You just hired everybody. You just announced, you came down the elevator, if I can use the reference of a Trump. And you come down the elevator and say, I'm announcing I'm going to be the first king of Israel. And the first thing that your advisors say, you know what would make this really easy? If you just kill all your political enemies. That's a great idea. Let's line them up and kill them all at the same stone. Oh, by the way, these are my brothers. History's full of this. Pick any nation where there's been a monarchy of any sort, and you're going to find the blood of a lot of family there. Probably the most famous example in England is the two kids that were in the tower that went missing. I think we found one of them, didn't we? Buried in the tower. So we know they were killed or they died. But that was a whole mess. Anyway, so this is not uncommon. However, I want you to notice what you have here. You have a brother killing his brothers. This is a Cain against Abel situation. But notice there is a third brother, if you will. I know that's more than three, but you have Abimelech, you have a group of brothers who are all killed, and then you get this third brother who survives. And that's in the rest of verse 5. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left. He hid himself. So this is the Seth character, if you will. So now you have this war between two brothers. So this is Cain versus Seth. This is Shem and Japheth versus Ham. This is Jacob versus Esau. Isaac versus Ishmael. Right? This is Joseph versus his brothers. Joseph, Benjamin versus the other. This is the story of the Bible. It's the story of history. And remember, they just went to war against their cousins, the Midianites. The Midianites traced their lineage back to Abraham. So what was happening out there has now come in here. They are Canaanites through and through. This is the problem of Judges. Well, the story goes on that, by the way, Jotham means Yahweh is perfect or blameless. And so verse 6, the leaders of Shechem came together and all at Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king. There it is. He's made king at an oak tree. Of course, oak trees are all over Old Testament. Well, so Jotham finds out starting in verse 7, and he actually he stands at a distance, sort of like David will do later with Saul, and he tells a parable. So those of you in Danny's class, I've been talking to him about parables in the Old Testament. Here is another parable. And it is a weird parable. First time I read it, I thought, what in the world? So here it is. We don't have time to read it. He basically describes 4 trees: an olive tree, verse 8 and 9, a fig tree, verses 10 through 11, a vine, I know it's not a tree, but work with me, verses 12 to 13, and then a thorn bush, verses 14 and 15. And they are all personified, anthropomorphized, to where the olive tree is offered to be a king, and he says, no, I need to do this. The fig tree is said, why don't you be king? And he says, no, I'm supposed to be doing this. And then the vine comes and says, why don't you be king? He says, no, we got to do this. And then the thorn bush comes. He says, yeah, I'll be king. In fact, why don't all of you all rest under my shade? The problem with the bramble, your translation may say, ESV says that, or the thorn bush, is it's about 2 feet high. Oak tree or olive tree isn't going to find much shade from a thorn bush. And you'll notice that the first 3 trees, the olive, fig, and vine, are valuable and contributed to the economy of Israel. They produce their main crops. The thorn bush isn't valuable at all. If you come up on the thorn bush, you want to get rid of the sucker, even now. It has no value whatsoever, and they are too short to be used for shade. Furthermore, they catch on fire very easily. In fact, go down to verse 15. The bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, come, take a refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. It's picking up on that imagery. So you either submit, come under my shade, or I will burn you. What's Jotham saying? You're the worthless tree, and we're not going to come under your shade. To quote Petra, this means war. Here's your reference, Don, Petra. So this sets up the rest of the chapter. Seth will not submit to Cain. And so now all of that is explained in verses 16 to 20. Time just won't allow full explanations. But in verse 21, Jotham, after he says that, he ends up fleeing. He runs away. Verse 21, Jotham ran away and fled and went to Beer and lived there because of Abimelech, his brother. Again, his brother. It's a Cain story. So what we get then in verse 22 to the end is not war between Jotham and Abimelech, which is what we've been set up to see. Now that war will happen, not in this context. There will be actually, we get 2 civil wars in Judges. This is the first one, and then the book ends with a very graphic and violent civil war. Judges is a mess. So here the battle isn't between brothers in the sense of Jotham versus Abimelech. It's a war of brothers between Abimelech and the Shechemites. And that's sort of the point. In the explanation of the parable, Jotham basically says, if you treated my father and his family well, then blessings upon you. But if you didn't treat them right, and remember how chapter 8 ended, that they didn't treat the household of Gideon right, then what's going to happen is you're going to turn on yourself. And that's what happens starting in verse 22. So go down to verse 22. Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. So notice here that Jotham can go in hiding because he already knows what's going to happen. When evil rules, evil will turn against itself. I don't know if you study a lot of like crime stories. Like go back to the gangsters of the Prohibition era. Did you ever notice how often they end up turning on each other, other than Bonnie and Clyde? But even in that story, you remember how they got Bonnie and Clyde? It was his brother-in-law, something like that, who ended up just when the Texas Rangers showed up. He says it was one of their safe houses, and they figured it out, and they said, "Look, here's your choices. They're going to die, or you can die." Basically, you go back to the prison. And he says, "Okay," and he says, "I'll set it up." It was an internal thing. You look at all those gangsters, man. They all do this. The gangs do this now. There will always be internal fighting because of idolatry. Does this? Idolatry does not create peace. Never does this. No harmony, no unity. Look at the United States of America right now. There will not be unity so long as there is idolatry. So I want to highlight this. It's in verse 23. God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leader of Shechem. What in the world is going on there? I don't know. But let's let the Bible talk, okay? This language is not unique to this story. In fact, you're familiar with this, actually. Let me give you the most prominent example of this. 1 Samuel 16. And remember, David is anointed in chapter 16, and he slays Goliath in chapter 17. I think that's right. So here's 1 Samuel 16. Now the Spirit of Yahweh departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit tormented him. Now, we looked at this way back when, years ago now, and there's a lot of debate as what's going on here. You remember, this is how David gets into the administration of Saul. David can play music. He's a really talented pianist, right? And so he goes in and he plays Kenny G on the saxophone, and that soothes Saul. But it can only soothe him for so long. In fact, I think, chapter 19, then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in hand. David was playing the lyre. Remember what he does with that spear? Zing! And David goes, maybe I should quit. Okay, God, I can get the message. I don't need to pray this one out. I think you made it clear. I need to go one of these directions, but not stay here. But it's the harmful spirits. Another one is 2 Kings 19. Behold, I put a spirit in him so that he shall hear a rumor, return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own hand. Acts 19, the evil spirit answered them, Jesus I know, Paul I recognize, but who are you? And remember, this is when they jump on the sons of Sceva and all that sort of stuff. But there it is again, that the evil spirit. So what in the world's going on here? Don?
God asked somebody to go down and lie to their cousins north and south.
Yeah, that's a passage of the divine counsel. Is in one of them he'll send a lying spirit out. And we could add other things to this. The angel of death at Passover. So there are these difficult passages. Let me give you two options that you have here, for our purposes too. I'm sure there's a dozen others. One is, this is a disembodied entity following the Lord's command. Okay, angel, some other category, seraphim, cherubim, something like that. So some sort of spiritual being, disembodied being. The other option is this is an internal psychological judgment. Judging by the Saul story, it is at the very least psychological because the playing of music seems to soothe him. But it is of such a sort that it becomes more than what David's playing could handle. Now, the evil spirit could affect you psychologically, internally. I have no doubt about that. But this is just one of those passages. I don't know what to do with it. I don't have all the answers. It just, we'll let the text say what the text says, believing what the text says.
We do that when Paul got the spirit from Satan to buffet him. We found that on his eyeballs.
To what?
When Saul received a messenger of Satan.
Oh.
He blamed it on things that are common to man.
Yeah. So people say that he's going blind, he's got malaria, the thorn in the flesh. Yeah. There's no messenger of Satan. What's going on there? And God seems to be providentially over that. God providentially is over the Satan with Job. Look, there's just passages. I don't have all the answers to them. But when there is some mystery, we should be careful not to develop an entire theology exclusively from. So Austerbeg is, the main thing are the clear things are the main things. So here's these passages. We can wrestle with them together. Regardless, the narrative follows that this is an act of divine judgment upon Abimelech and the Shechemites. Verse 24, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who is Abimelech's other half-brothers, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And so the leaders of Shechem put men in ambush against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way. And it was told Abimelech. So I've not read any of these books, but I plan on doing it one day. It's the Jack Ryan books by, help me out.
Tom Clancy.
Yeah, Tom Clancy, yes. But I've watched almost all the movies, okay, and watched some of the television show with Jim from The Office. And they're interesting, a little CIA spy, he's a little smart dude. My favorite one of those is the first one I ever watched, and my wife could tell you I love this movie. It's The Sum of All Fears. It's where they put the nuclear bomb in the Pepsi vending machine in like a baseball or a football stadium. All these people die. President almost dies. Spoiler alert. So the bad guy in it, he has a great line. He says, Hitler was an ignoramus. It's my word. Hitler thought you just go to war against Russia and America. No. You get Russia and America to go at war with each other. So the plan of the bad guy is he sets off the nuclear bomb, which he gets off the black market. It's kind of creepy. And then that launches a war between the two giants. And that, of course, creates this vacuum. This guy gets what he wants. Both are brought down. That's what you have here. Is that Abimelech, who has the power, but his support system turns against him, and they go at war. So verses 25 to 29, Shechem burns Abimelech. Remember that parable? So verse 25, the leaders of Shechem set up blockades against Abimelech. And then verses 26 to 29, they try to put someone else on the throne. His name is Gaal. Gaal means loathing. And he is the son of Ebed, which means servants. And so basically this guy moves into town. He's an outsider. And he says, anyone, would you rather vote for me or that guy? Me? Great. I'll take the throne now, and they try to make it. So Abimelech doesn't like that. Abimelech finds out and from a guy named Zebul. And so now verses 30 to 41, Abimelech burns Shechem. And so basically what you have is the Shechemites thought this guy named Zebul would join them. He says, no, I'm loyal to Abimelech. So he helps Abimelech in fighting the Shechemites. And so Zebul tells Abimelech, you need to respond in kind with violence. So I think Zebul is one of these worthless men that we were introduced to earlier. His plan is to ambush Gaal supporters in the field at night and then ambush the city at sunrise. So his supporters, you're going to wipe them out, and then you're going to march into the city as people are waking up, and you're going to deal with them there. Now, this is almost like Gideon. You remember, Gideon came and tore down towers. He killed elders. He did all that. But this is a much higher level of it. Now, go down to verse 34. Abimelech and all the men who were with him rose up by night and set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. Gideon had 3. Abimelech has 4 companies. Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city. And Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down mountaintops. He's a deceiver, Zebul is. Zebul said to him, you mistake the shadow of the mountains for men. Gaal spoke again and said, look, people are coming down in the center of the land, and one company is coming from the direction of the diviner's oak. Notice the paganism, the diviner's oak. That is not Hebrew language. That is not proper worship of God. Verse 38, then Zebul said to him, where is your mouth now, you who said, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despise? Go out now and fight with them. And Gaal went out at the head of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. Many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. Abimelech lived at Aramah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives, so they could not dwell in Shechem. So this is victory. However, he doesn't stop there. If the threat is this dude named Gaal, the guy that got rid of his political opponents by killing them does essentially the same thing with Gaal. That's where it should end. People have learned their lesson. He can walk into the city. What are you going to do now? That's it. That's all he has to do. He has subdued the threat to his throne. And no king likes threats to his thrones. But his pride gets the best of him, and he wants to teach them a lesson. So in verses 42 to 45, he kills innocent people. So he ambushes unarmed citizens out in the field of Shechem. So these are people who presumably they say, okay, the coup didn't work. We're going to go on with our lives. Remember, Abimelech said, wouldn't you prefer to have me as your king? I'm one of you. At the end of the day, we're brothers. What does he do? He lets people go back to work where he kills them out in the field. By the way, where do you recognize the language of a brother killing his brother out in the field? It's the story of Cain. And this shows up in other places as well, this idea. So, and then verse 44 to 45, he kills people in the city and he razes it to the ground. There's one phrase here worth looking at. Verse 45, Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city and killed the people who were in it. He razed the city and sold it with salt. That's crazy. So from what I've been able to tell, this was a common practice in the ancient Near Eastern world, that basically what you said is, this land will never be lived in again because you can't grow crops here. I've leveled it. This is a new city of Jericho. God didn't tell Abimelech to do this. God never told him he should be king. This is what paganism looks like up close. They've become the Canaanites. The very thing they were supposed to get rid of. Now, you know my love for archaeology in the Bible. Shechem, we know archaeologically and biblically, was not destroyed during the conquest. But it was destroyed later, and that is what we have found this city. We have found it, and guess what? It fits this description. If you look at the timing of its... So you can look at when was it destroyed compared to when was Jericho and Ai destroyed. And the years make it clear it wasn't the same campaign. This fits the archaeological record. And then in verse 46 to 49, he literally burns Shechem. Remember the parable. You are a thorn bush, and either, if those who don't find shade under you, you're going to burn them. And so what is he doing? The Shechemites try to burn Abimelech, but through a coup, he goes burns them. Now he literally burns them. In 46 to 49, here he burns down the Tower of Shechem. There are 1,000 men and women who die in it. By the way, we have found the Tower of Shechem, again, archaeologically, and it was one of the largest formations excavated in ancient Canaan. So, with that said, Shechemites aren't done. They've got nothing to lose now. This is the problem. When you just turn to violence for your answers, you're actually making your problem worse. Let America hear me on that. Those who live by the sword die by it. Those who live by the Winchester die by the Winchester. Ask the Hatfield McCoys. And those who live by burning your enemies will die by the burning of your enemies. Verses 50 to 57 is the death of Abimelech. We'll pick up here verse 50. Abimelech went to Thebes and encamped against Thebes and captured it. See, he should stop here now, right? Okay, you've killed Gaal and all of his supporters. Okay, that's where it should stop. But if you're going to keep going, all right, you got people out in the field, you got people in the city, you tear it down. You go to the tower, which is military place, which he could use as a king, but nevertheless, he's going to burn it to the ground. 1,000 people die, and you would think his anger is satisfied. No. He's going to go to another city in Shechem, and he's going to kill them. And the Shechemites realize there is no end to this man's violence. He's evil. He's a Canaanite through and through. So he goes to Thebes to capture it. Verse 51, there was a strong tower within the city. We know what he wants to do with it. All the men and women and all the elders of the city fled to it and shut themselves in it, and they went up to the roof of the tower. This is what happened to the Tower of Shechem. You remember, he burned it to the ground. Everyone in it died. Verse 52, Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. So he's going to do the same exact thing as he did before. And a certain woman, notice she is unnamed. Not the first woman hero we've met. We've talked about this. Deborah, Yael, there's others. Here we have another woman saving Israel, if you will. But she's saving Israel not against a foreign invader, but from an internal wicked man, a usurper. A certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Now, you should pause there. That language is important. One, we should say that this story will return and be repeated later. Of course, Saul, this story mirrors Saul. We'll get to that. It's repeated in 2 Samuel 11. Who killed Abimelech, the text asks. Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died at Thebes? Why did you go to near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. This is with David and all that stuff. So David is compared to Abimelech. But notice here, the skull of Abimelech is crushed. That language should jump off the page. What is the broad story arc of the Bible? It is that of a snake. And what is going to happen to the snake? His head is going to be crushed. And we see the story arc all over the Bible. And I don't know if I've done that here, where we actually looked at that in like 20 minutes. You can do the whole Bible. I actually discovered another one recently. So probably the most prominent one is Goliath. So Goliath mixes the language of the serpent and the giants together, those two story arcs. So Goliath, of course, is a giant, but his armor is described as it's scaly, and it's bronze. The Hebrew word bronze has the same letters in it as serpents. And what does David do? He slays him, and he falls head forward, and he eats the dust of the earth. That's the curse upon the serpent in Genesis 3. And then he chops the head off with his own sword. And he holds on to the head and everything of Goliath. We later find the sword of Goliath. David has it as a keepsake, as I would too, let's be honest, okay? Look, if you and I are going to keep baseballs at a Lexington Legends game, I'm keeping a giant sword.
Is that where the deer head started?
Yes, there it is, with the gun right next to it. There I was, 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why. Nice 40-degree weather. You can see the breath coming out. And there she was in all of her glory. You're going on my wall. That's a very American thing to do. But of course, this is what Jesus does. Jesus is the one who ultimately crushes the head of the serpent. Let me give you another example that I just discovered. Acts 16:16. You can look it up in your own Bible. It's the story of the little girl who's a fortune teller. It says that she has a python spirit in the Greek. Python spirit. It's a Greco-Roman tale involving Apollo and Diana and others. But what Paul does is he overcomes the python spirit. And he's getting annoyed by her, and because he doesn't want people to confuse his message with her fortune telling. So he casts out the spirits, and people get mad at that because he cost them a lot of money. They were capitalists, of course. But it's python spirit. Jesus, when he does talk about handling snakes, if I can use that language, when he sends out the 70, that fits this context. So here you have the serpentine character who is crushed by an unnamed woman. What's the prophecy? The seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpents. Here it's not the seed, but it is a woman. Later in the story of David, a woman will throw heads over the wall. Very similar to this. David will go to war against the son of a guy named Nahash, which means servant. He fights against the seed of the serpent. It's all over the Bible. All over. There's dragons, serpents, everything. All fits this context. We got to move on. Verse 54. He called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed him." And his young man thrust him through, and he died. Now, this story, of course, mirrors that of Saul. In 1 Samuel 3, it says... 31 rather, the battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers have found him and was badly wounded by the archers. Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it." Very same language. "Lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." And of course, he doesn't do it. He ends up dying himself. So once Saul died from his wounds, he kills himself, and it goes on from there. And their bodies are used to be displayed. Right, yeah, and David is not a fan of this. Now remember, we've already seen in Judges that if you're a man of power, who kills you is important to your legacy. You remember Gideon did this. You remember he wanted his young son to kill the princes? And his young son's like, "Dad, I'm still watching cartoons on Saturday morning. Get one of my older brothers to do it." And then Gideon does it himself. That's an honorable death. If you're going to be defeated in battle, be defeated by an honorable enemy. What we have here is he's defeated by a dishonorable enemy. Now, there's nothing wrong with her as a woman. I'm not saying that at all. She's unnamed. She has no power. She has no influence. Abimelech has had all the power in conquering everywhere he goes. And then a woman does a simple thing, is she manages to push a millstone. That's big. It just pushes it off, and it just so happens to crush his head. Now remember, yeah, Don. Might be. I don't know. I'm sure this is common, that how you die matters. David dies cold, weak, with the vultures surrounding him, and he's afraid for his throne. He has to get Solomon and all them in. Now remember, we have Yael killing a guy, another woman, and that becomes the source of a song. Yael, this woman, was able to crush his head. Notice verse 55. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. They do the thing Abimelech was unwilling to do himself. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads. Notice heads. So their heads have been crushed. And upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Now, he's done nothing in this other than he gave a parable. He leaves the story. But God here is not just exercising judgment over the nations in the land of Canaan. He's exercising judgment over the people of God. Because it's the same thing. They become Canaanites. And this is to be the land of God. So, two things we can get from this, and then we're done. The first thing, clearly, God judges sin. And what I have in mind here is actually idolatry as the source of sin. We usually think of judgment in a form of external enemies wreaking havoc, or of natural things. Fire and brimstone, lightning, earthquakes, that sort of stuff. But perhaps the most common form of judgment is actually God handing over his enemies to the natural results of their actions. So if you know nothing about Abimelech, but I say he's a man of rage, a man of pride, and a man of violence, you know how the story ends. He doesn't have a good marriage with one woman. His land does not live at peace. People will turn against him. You know how the story ends. So what we get this in the Bible, and I think this is where we are as a country. This is made clear in Romans chapter 1. I want you, I've highlighted that God gave them up. So for this reason, professing to be wise, they became fools. Somehow I missed 2 verses there. Oh well. Regardless, for this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. The women exchanged natural relations for those of contrary nature. Men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Here's the issue. Consumed. Passions. And instead of self-control, you just give in to these desires. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. Notice here, it's not God saying, okay, you're going to do that, light everyone on fire. It's rather that you receive in yourself the due penalty for his error. God gave them over. And then he then says, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They are filled with manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give hearty approval to those who practice them. That phrase, God gave them over, is itself an act of judgment. One of the things, one of the most common questions I got when COVID hit was the question, is this a judgment of God? And I remember my answer was always the same. It was, I don't know. I don't have a Bible verse saying in the year 2020 you're going to get a virus. I don't have that Bible verse. However, I can say I think we're already under that judgment. Because what we have as a nation is God giving us over actually to every desire we could ever imagine. Everything, medically and politically and militarily and economically and sexually and spiritually, across the board. Yeah, Mark?
Anything goes, everything soon follows.
Yeah. So what you have is we are consumed with our passions and lusts. And when everyone is consumed with that, we become like Abimelech and the Shechemites. We hate each other more than we hate external threats right now. I mean, we hate each other. We absolutely hate each other as a nation. Yeah, Don.
Would you say Abimelech was more of a psychopath than that?
Probably. Yeah. Power has a way of doing that, doesn't it?
Really own family, she's not a psychopath. It would bother most people.
Yeah. But he fits the mode of ancient Near Eastern. Anyone threatens your power, you kill everyone. And it is not until the triumph of Christianity in America, and a little before that in England and in the West, that this story becomes bizarre. Like, it's weird to us to think of a ruler going just slaughtering people, his own people. I'll give you an example of this, Don, then I'll holler at you. Les Miserables is my favorite musical. Well, it's the only musical I like, really. Les Miserables, the musical. In it, the French, right? It's the French Revolution stuff. In it, the soldiers fire on their own people. Okay, I remember watching that, thinking,
Sounds like Kent. Something like
"Oh, Ken, yeah. Now, why is that so shocking? That didn't happen here. We have riots. We have cities burning on fire to the ground. No shots are fired by the governments. That's natural to us. That has never happened in history. No government has ever hesitated to kill its own people. No government has hesitated to that. What's the triumph of Christianity? So for Abimelech to say, people want my job, I'll kill every single one of them. And not just kill them, I'll torture them. The Romans did this. When Spartacus and the slaves revolted, for miles they were crucified shoulder to shoulder, both sides of the roads at eye level. So as you walked for miles down the street, the smell of rotten carcasses in the Middle Eastern sun, you would smell and look at in the eyes people who are dying and suffocating. That was the way the Romans ran things. If you took over a place, you would enslave the women and children, you'd slaughter all the strong men, and you'd torture them in the process. This was normal. We read that in history and we think, what changed? I'll tell you what changed. Someone conquered the dead by means of Roman torture. You read Abimelech, this is normal. Don?
That's the only passage that mentioned women with women.
Yeah.
So
And it mentions it first. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. Here's the last thing I have. So we have judgment of God in forms of God handing us over to our debased desires. The other is, I do think Abimelech is a warning against unrighteous rulers. Power can either be a tool for good or for evil, and we err when we make it one or the other. So if power is something you lust after, stay far away from it. You're going to use it for evil. Many people think, well, if I had the power, obviously I would do everything right. No, you should probably run from it then. It is the people who understand the problem with power that you want to have it. Yeah.
I ran into this. We run into a Washington, D.C. several years ago to visit Larry Hopkins, and he's in a big building full of all kinds of guys like him.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of those guys, senators, whatever, I don't know what it was, but every one of them has got Wonder Woman secretaries, like 5 or 6 in each office.
Mm-hmm.
These women are beyond brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, you go Capitol. And I've always joked that if you get the LAs and the security guards on your side, you can accomplish anything at the Capitol. But without the legislative assistant secretaries, nothing would be done at the state level. Nothing.
But they are attracted to power.
Yeah.
I mean, if the guy's got the power, they'll do anything to help him increase his power.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, and campaign staff are bad with that.
Other guy, what was the big three in the Second World War? Churchill, Roosevelt, and who?
Stalin?
Stalin killed 12 million people after the war, I think.
Yeah.
That he thought,
And their population, every other generation hasn't recovered. So many people were killed in the war and with the slaughters. It's incredible what Stalin did. So let me just advise, be careful giving power to unstable, worthless men whose main interest is their own. I'll let you decide whether or not we've done that at all in our history, locally or nationally or even internationally. Well, he's not the only one I have in mind. So I'll just say this, as American, I think our founding fathers, not perfect, no government is perfect. I do think they were wise in one area. They understood that the problem was not in government who has the power. Monarchy is power is concentrated in a single individual, where he becomes lord over the law. Oligarchy it's several people. Democracy is that the people have it. Now, the problem isn't who possesses power. The problem is power. So what the founding fathers set up was a government system that kept power at bay the best it could. So you may think there's an important bill that needs to pass and it'll fix all of our country's problems. At least that's the way they'll sell it on Fox News or MSNBC. But it's almost impossible to pass that bill on purpose, because you don't want an empowered government, but you don't want an empowered people. We are not a democracy for that reason. We're a republic. In fact, we had to pass an amendment to the Constitution to elect senators. That's supposed to be chosen by the states, not by the voter, for this very reason. So democracy isn't perfect, monarchy isn't perfect, oligarchy is not perfect, no other system is. But I do think the Founding Fathers were right in that if you can limit power and a person's access to it, then you can have liberty. But then again, you can't have liberty unless people worship the right God.
Democracy won't work against an evil nation,
Right, right.
because they always pass laws that's wrong.
Yeah. The thing about democracy is that once people realize they can just vote in whatever they want, they'll vote in whatever they want. And people are fools. Massive groups of people are even more foolish.
The thing that we were warned about is never let the public get a hold of the national treasure.
Oh, yeah.
Complete control of that.
Yeah. Where the money is, yep. All right. Anything we miss? I know Danny and them's not here. All right. We made it through. Pretty good. All right. Don, you close us in prayer?